Number 10. The Vampire of Venice. Italian researchers believe that they have discovered the remains of a lady vampire buried in Venice with a brick stuck between her jaw. The reason that the brick was placed between her jaw was probably to prevent her from biting people if she somehow managed to rise from the grave. According to an anthropologist from the University of Florence named Matteo Borini, the discovery was made on a small island in the Venice lagoon, and it's supporting the theory that vampires were truly feared during medieval Europe, especially during the Black Death. This was a time when many Europeans were dying from disease, and a lot of them blamed it on vampires. Before scientists discovered the germ theory of infectious diseases, the supernatural was often blamed for bad events, like the plague. Believe it or not, this was the first archaeological discovery that truly reconstructed the ritual that Europeans undertook to get rid of vampires. The skeleton came out of a mass grave filled with plague victims from around 1576. Plagues devastated Europe between 1300 and 1700, and this really helped to boost their belief in vampires. They really thought that sticking a brick inside of a dead person's mouth would stop them from turning into an evil bloodsucker. Number 9. The Tower of Skulls. In other horrifying archaeological news, a giant Aztec tower of human skulls, believed to be about 500 years old, was recently unearthed. In Mexico, this site is known as Huei Tzompantli, first discovered in 2015. But recently, a new find added 119 skulls to the previously discovered 484 skulls. This has raised the total number of skulls used to build the horrifying tower to 603. All the skulls had been stuck together with mortar to create a literal Tower of Death. Researchers are saying that it was one of 7 skull towers that stood throughout the ancient Aztec city of Tenochtitlan, what is now modern-day Mexico City. The towers were first mentioned by Hernan Cortés in 1521, with most of them being destroyed by Spanish conquistadors shortly after their arrival. According to Rodrigo Bolanas, one of the biological anthropologists investigating the site, one of the most shocking revelations was that the new skulls came from not only men, but also women and children. As of now, it's unclear who the skulls belong to or why the skulls of children were added to this disturbing landmark. What do you think it was? To scare people? An honor to the gods? Let me know in the comments below, and then be sure to hit that subscribe button if you're new here. We have more awesome videos coming up. Number 8. The Voices of Mummies. In a paper published in 2020, researchers claimed that they managed to recreate the voice of an ancient Egyptian mummy that died 3,000 years ago. Researchers did this by recreating the mummy's vocal tract using special medical scanners, newly advanced 3D printing, and a unique electronic larynx tool. The authors of the scientific paper said that this technique allowed them to produce just one sound, a single vowel. And yet, this one vowel turned out to be one of the scariest sounds that researchers ever heard. It was a very close reflection of how the Egyptian priest Nesyamun, who they had chosen for their research, would have sounded. However, the sound was not exactly perfect because the mummy had already lost its tongue, and they were unable to recreate that. Researchers also said that their model wasn't enough to synthesize entire words or sentences. But, I mean, even just hearing a grunt or a groan from a mummy is pretty terrifying. Just imagine if this ancient priest did come back to life and started uttering scary sounds. Number 7. Strange New Dinosaur. A strange and terrifying new species of dinosaur has recently been discovered. This dinosaur lived about 110 million years ago along the shores of an old lagoon in what is now Brazil. It was from the Cretaceous period, and the dinosaur stood on 2 legs. It was about the size of a chicken, but it was horrifying. The dinosaur had an incredible mane of hair with 2 extremely strange structures protruding from its shoulders, kind of like really long horns. Scientists are saying that these almost ribbon-like protrusions were made from the same material that makes our hair and fingernails. This is called keratin, and it's the same kind of stuff that's responsible for rhino horns. Even though there are many strange dinosaurs out there, David Martill from the University of Portsmouth in England said that this is one unlike any other. It didn't even have proper feathers. It had something called proto-feathers, which were like a rudimentary type of feather first seen in small dinosaurs. Even though the fossils of this creepy monster, which is called Ubirajara jubatus, by the way, were first found in the 1900s. It wasn't until just recently that scientists were able to figure out the size and shape of the dino. And suffice to say, it has shocked the world of paleontology. Number 6, a brutal murder. A new discovery from 2020 has revealed an Anglo-Saxon skull with a very brutal story behind it. About 1100 years ago in medieval England, a teenage girl came to a sad and horrifying end. According to the evidence found on the skull, her lips were cut with a weapon and her nose was sliced off. She also may have been scalped. As of right now, nobody knows why the woman needed to be mutilated in such a vicious way. The only logical explanation is that the woman was being punished for something horrific that she did, or labeled horrific by lawmakers of the time. Lead researcher Gerard Cole said that the highly formalized nature of the woman's grotesque injuries suggests that she was paying some kind of penalty for acting out, or possibly being promiscuous, or even a religious heretic. She was clearly considered by that community and its leaders to be deviant, and they felt justified in torturing her. Truly savage and disturbing. As for how the skull was found, it was originally discovered in the 1960s at an excavation site in the small village of Oak Ridge. However, it wasn't until 2020 that the analysis of the skull was completed and published in the scientific journal Antiquity. Number 5, Nightmare Reef. A British ghost ship has recently been found by archaeologists in Mexico, and it's a pretty scary sight to behold. The British ship is about 200 years old, and it has been turning into an underwater nightmare ever since it was sunk for unknown reasons. Even though the wreck was originally spotted in the 1990s by a local fisherman, about 22 miles or 35 kilometers from the coast of Quintana Roo, the wreck wasn't explored for the first time until 2020 by divers with Mexico's National Archaeological Institute. The ship is currently sitting at the bottom of an ancient historical trade route that had gone between Colombia and Spain, with a short stop in Havana. But because of the size of the reef in this area, it was actually responsible for a lot of wreckages back in the 1800s. So far, there have been about 70 shipwrecks discovered in this one reef. It's a formidable graveyard of ancient vessels, and not a good place to dive if you're squeamish. Number 4, murderous Chinese emperor tomb. The tomb of a horrifying and murderous Chinese emperor has just been discovered by archaeologists while excavating a mausoleum in China. Before this recent discovery, archaeologists were unsure who the mausoleum belonged to. However, they just discovered an artifact in 2021 that has confirmed a long-standing suspicion that the tomb belongs to Emperor Liu Zhi, who ruled between 146 and 168 AD. This guy is also known as Emperor Huan, and it's all because of a seal discovered with the emperor's successor's name on it, Emperor Liu Hong. The legend states that Liu Hong crafted a mausoleum for Liu Shi after his death. But here's where the discovery gets scary. It's not about what was found, but rather about the guy who was buried inside the tomb. Emperor Liu Zhi ruled China during a time of great horror, when there was famine, when there were bloody rebellions, and when palace officials were being murdered on a semi-daily basis. Records from the 11th century claim that in response to the rebellions and the famines, the emperor killed and executed those closest to him. This would be the equivalent of the president murdering the people who worked in the White House because of an agricultural disaster in the country. Basically, Emperor Liu Zhi was a nightmare of a person. Number 3, the Mask of the Bat God. An ancient jade mask was found in Mexico, and it's one of the freakier artifacts that has ever been uncovered in the country. It's known as the Mask of the Bat God, and it was found inside the ruins of the Monte Alban pyramids near Oaxaca. The mask depicts the savage Zapotec bat god, and there's no denying it is incredibly sinister. Monte Alban was the heart of the ancient and very powerful Zapotec civilization, and bats were symbolic among their people for several reasons. The most key reason was that bats lived inside of caves, temples, and tombs, all places related to the sacred world of the dead. This ended up encouraging the Zapotec people to come up with their own god of the underworld, who just so happened to take on the form of a bat. Plus, bats were significant because they came out at night, and nightfall was symbolic because it represented death and spirits. As for the mask itself, it was probably created between 100 BC and 200 AD. It was crafted out of 25 separate pieces of jade and is currently on display at the National Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City. Number 2. Secret Tunnel of Death. With the help of some very skilled robots, archaeologists have just made a scary discovery of skeletons inside of a secret tunnel of death. This astonishing discovery was made beneath the Chavin de Huantar temple in Peru, dated about 3,000 years old. American and Peruvian archaeologists worked together with the latest robotic technology to identify 3 skeletons that had probably been murdered as part of a greater sacrifice. The robot was able to go into some very dark tunnels underneath the religious and administrative center of the ancient settlement, otherwise unreachable by archaeologists, and it was there that the bodies were found. The robots were designed by engineers at Stanford University, complete with lights and remote operation technology. It's now been estimated that there are about 35 interlinked tunnels beneath the complex of Chavin de Huantar, though the truth of what exactly they were used for and why the sacrifices of young people were left in the tunnels to rot is still a huge mystery that archaeologists need to solve. Number 1. Cocooned Mummy. An extraordinarily rare mud mummy has shocked and surprised archaeologists all over the world. Researchers on the project published their findings in the journal PLOS One, saying that the mud mummy is an unparalleled find, and that the mortuary treatment of encasing a dead person in mud has never been previously documented in all of the Egyptian history. Not a single other mud mummy has ever been found. And what's really scary about this mummy is that it looks as though the skeleton is wrapped up in some kind of cocoon. Some researchers are now saying that the mummy was likely wrapped in mud before being buried to emulate the intense embalming and mummification procedures used by the elite in ancient Egyptian society. That means that this mummy may have been interred with mud because mud was a lot cheaper than wrappings. It was also found that the mummy was put inside the wrong coffin. The mummy was male, dead since around 1207 BC, and yet he was found in a coffin designed for a female. It could very well be that whoever mummified this person was on a serious budget. Which of these amazing archaeological discoveries freaked you out the most? Let me know in the comments, and thanks for watching. Be sure to hit the subscribe button if you haven't already.